friend Andy McCarthy in the mix with us. He's of National Review and Fox News. 20-plus years. He was a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. You all know him. Andy, great to have you back on the show.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Oh, we're pretty good. Clay's got some baseball smack to talk, I'm sure, at some point. But I wanted to jump right in.
I wasn't smacked enough yesterday. I need it from Clay today.
Yeah. So I need to know this, Andy. What happens if Trump walks into this trial with Marchand and basically just dares him to actually put him in prison? Because right now he's fining him $1,000 a day, found him in contempt again. Where does this standoff between Donald Trump and some judge in New York City end up going?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of huffing and puffing, but I don't think it gets worse than it is now, because to me, this is all political theater at this point. This whole case was brought because of politics, and I think it would be disastrous electoral politics.
We might have just lost Andy there for a sec. He's going to come back. You heard him start to answer the question about how it would be disastrous electoral politics. I think that's true. So I think Andy McCarthy is back with us. Andy, I'll let you continue that answer to Buck's question that you were giving about the politics of the idea of putting Trump in jail for potentially violating the contempt of court order.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. I just think it would be such a disaster for the Democrats politically to have Trump put into jail on a very unfair gag order, in the sense that he's the only person on the planet who can't talk about this. You know, the other witnesses in the case are allowed to talk. His political opposition's allowed to talk. But the other thing, you wouldn't think that Democrats want more attention to this case, which putting Trump in jail would put I think, immensely more attention on it than it's already gotten, not to say that it's gotten only a trivial amount. And the harder you look at this case, the worse it is. So I just really think that I think Marchand's going to finger wag at Trump, but I don't think he's going to do more than fine him.
What is the point of this then, Andy? If politically the Democrats don't even want there to be more attention on this, right? Building on what you just said, is it all just to try to tag him with convicted of a felony and then just run a lot of ads on that? Is it as simple and maybe simplistic as that?
Well, you know, we got to also think about what their internal polling is showing, right? So I know there was polling that was reported in the Times, the New York Times, I want to say about, 3 or 4 months ago, that said that Trump was doing well, but that there was a sizable amount of people, and when I say sizable, enough to swing the battleground states. So we're talking, 5, 6, 7 points, where if Trump is actually convicted of a felony, he loses support. And I think they may be reading too much into that, because I think this case is such nonsense, and it's been so apparent that New York is rigged against Trump. These are elected Democrats who are bringing these cases. I'm not sure how much a conviction in this case would hurt Trump. I mean, obviously he doesn't want to be convicted, but I think it may be negligible. Whereas I do think if he got convicted on a January 6th case, or if he got convicted of, say, obstruction in the Florida case, I think that would have a measurable downside effect for him. I'm not sure how much this case will.
Okay, let's dive into the case itself, Andy, because admittedly, Buck and I are on the show for 3 hours every day, so I'm not able to follow the minute, minute-by-minute of the court case. But the longer this case goes on, the more legitimate questions I think have to be raised about the foundational legality of it at all. Right. I think this whole thing's going to get tossed. I look at it and I say, they're clearly trying to embarrass Trump with some of these details and some of these witnesses, but ultimately they're not proving very much of a crime, and they're actually giving him a lot of leeway here. Now, maybe it's not going to matter because they got such a rigged jury in their favor that they hate Trump and they're going to convict him no matter what.
Too, by the way. I mean, that's why are we assuming the appeals court? It's not going to be the Supreme Court. It's going to be the New York State of Appeals.
Well, eventually it could end up in the Supreme Court, but the New York Appeals Court, to their credit, just looked at the conviction they got in Harvey Weinstein, and I can't imagine, you know better than me, Andy, there are very many less popular defendants than Harvey Weinstein over the last decade, and they tossed it. When you look at this purely from the legal, let's leave aside the political. Is this a total joke to you too? Am I missing something?
No, I don't think you're missing anything. I think it will be overturned on appeal. I think it may be overturned by the appellate division before it ever gets to the Court of Appeals. It seems to me it's a non-crime. Bragg doesn't have jurisdiction to do what he's trying to do, which is enforce the federal campaign finance laws, which he's not really, Clay, even enforcing them. He's making up his own corpus of campaign finance law as he goes along. But he doesn't have authority to enforce those laws anyway. The indictment doesn't state a crime, which is a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And I think in violation of the New York Constitution, the statute that he's prosecuting under doesn't put people on notice that it gives authority to New York prosecutors to enforce federal crime. And I don't think that passes muster under a provision of the state constitution. So I think there's like any number of ways that this could be reversed because it's illegal. And that's why, to Buck's point before, I think what they're trying to do is get to the finish line, get this guy branded a convicted felon, and they want to run on that. I don't think they care whether it gets tossed, in the long term.
Okay, so the other thing here, and again, they're trying to provide a defense, obviously, to, as I think you and I both agree, what is a legally untenable argument that they're making. But also, I've been wondering whether this was going to germinate into something more substantial. I'm curious what you think about this. Trump paid off a doorman, or there was a doorman paid off who was claiming that Trump had a child out of wedlock, I think. Again, it was not
Correct.
true. Everybody acknowledges not true. So they have previously paid off past stories that were untrue because he was concerned about reputational aspect. That's where I'm going with this. It seems to me that there is actually an argument that this didn't involve the election at all, and that Trump loves Melania and has a good relationship with his wife and did not want a untrue story that he has, to be fair, almost no chance of proving is untrue, right? It's hard to prove a negative, to come out because he was worried not about whether it was going to impact his presidential prospects, but more so about it impacting his marriage, which I think a lot of married men out there can kind of respect that would not be a story you would want out publicly, even if it's 100% false. And therefore his motivation, which is what they're trying to argue was to influence the election, was actually to keep his marriage strong. What do you think about the jury being willing to buy that? To me, it does seem pretty compelling to anybody who's been in a marriage that you wouldn't want this story out there, even if it's 100% untrue.
Yeah, well, that's right. And that goes to the problem that Bragg has here. I mean, sometimes, and I've been critical of this, sometimes the defense seems to me to be a little bit internally contradictory, the things that they've tried to float to the jury. But what you always have to remember is it's only the prosecution that has kind of an interest in being completely logical, because if there's illogic in a prosecution case, that's doubt, and that's an invitation to acquittal. Whereas with the defense, what Trump really needs here is one juror. He doesn't need 12 like Bragg does. He needs one. So there could be, you could have 5 different jurors who have 5 different reasons for not liking this case. And sometimes those reasons crash into each other a little bit. One of them could be that Bragg it's not enough in this case for Bragg to prove that the book entries were false. He has to prove that Trump had fraudulent intent. And what he's trying to say is that the fraudulent intent was to violate the campaign finance laws. And I think it's a perfectly good defense to say, number one, Trump didn't have fraudulent intent because nobody was harmed here in any way. But if he was intending to do something, it was to prevent his family from being embarrassed. And he may never even, and he doesn't have to say he wasn't thinking at all about the election, but there's a big difference between thinking about the election and thinking with technical compliance of the campaign finance laws. Yeah. And if he was trying to protect his family, he doesn't even have to say whether these damaging stories were true or false. he doesn't have to convince the jury that these things didn't happen. It's enough to say they would have been profoundly embarrassing to his family, and he was trying to keep a lid on it, which is not, you can think about that what you want, but it doesn't make it a crime.
Andy, I'm just wondering if Judge Marchand just, let's say he's just had enough and he knows those fines are not doing anything to Trump, who's, very wealthy guy. What happens if he says, all right, I'm sentencing? I mean, like mechanically, like where does Trump go? What is the process if he says you're getting 10 days in jail for contempt? Like where would he go? How would that work with Donald Trump, who has Secret Service protection?
Presumably, it would be he would go and there would be a Secret Service detail around the clock. I have to presume. Look, normally it would be Rikers Island. But I don't see how you put Trump in Rikers Island, just for security reasons. And I think what they would probably do is, this whole, you know this better than I do. There's holding facilities in the police department. There's holding facilities in a number of other precincts. There's holding facilities in the courthouse. So I would imagine that part of what may be going on behind the scenes is some conversations between the NYPD and the Secret Service about, like, what's the plan going to be if Merchant actually pulls the trigger and puts this guy in?
No,
but
he'd have to be. It would be
I
like
can't
a prison just for Trump, right? I mean, they'd have to shut down the wing, or it would be he's the only guy being held in X facility, right? That's the only way they could do this.
I don't see how else, because he's going to have Secret Service protection. And, look, I worked in witness security before I was a prosecutor. You can't put this guy in general population in a even a pretrial facility. Obviously you can't.
And also, wouldn't it require that the trial be postponed? Because I guess they could bring him to and from jail and try to, move the process. But wouldn't he have a right? You would know this better than me. I haven't actually seen this. Let's say he got more than usually, Andy, what you'll see is somebody gets contempt for just a couple of hours and then they're back out, right? In other words, you're not actually spending the night in jail. Sometimes lawyers get into it with judges. Every now and then somebody goes down. If they're trying to put him in for multiple days, let's say Merchant says, hey, you're in the lockup for 2 weeks. Wouldn't he have a right to appeal that? How would that process play out?
I don't think he would have a right to stop the trial in order to appeal it. It's an interesting question. He'd ask to stop the trial, but I would assume that Merchant would say no, and he'd say, I'm not going to give you the value of the contempt, which is to screw up the proceedings, which is what you're trying to do. And this is what the judge would say. So I assume he would deny him a stay, and then his lawyers could go to the appellate division and try to appeal while the trial goes forward. And in the meantime, he'd be treated like, other than that he'd be in a special facility rather than, say, Rikers Island, he'd be treated like any other defendant who's in pretrial custody. He'd be produced every day during...
And you'd have the right to put on your suit, take off your jumpsuit, all that stuff. I was just wondering, I've never seen a client who is in contempt that I can remember during the appellate process, to say nothing for Trump. I mean, there are so many of these questions. Buck and I have been having fun with this. Like, the idea of a president going to prison with his security detail sounds like a bad sitcom pitch, right? Like back in the day in the 80s, this seems like something that might have been on television. And there are no real precedents for any of this.
Can I'd make one suggestion, Clay? I think there's a middle ground that he could start with, which is
home confinement, right? Trump Tower?
Home confinement, but make it over a Wednesday so we can't go out and campaign. And that wouldn't seem as bad publicly, I guess, politically for the Democrats. There's worse places to be in home confinement than Trump Tower. But, if you put him in home confinement, let's say he puts him in home confinement for 2 weeks, so he has to miss like a couple of campaign weekends and a couple of Wednesdays where he's going out doing his political stuff, that actually would be painful, and it probably wouldn't be as politically damaging to the Democrats as the idea of putting them in like Rikers Island or someplace like it.
Yeah, wow. I that's what I thought all along, Andy, is they may try to get some kind of a home confinement thing. I mean, Trump Tower does have very nice views, but it still feels like it's quite an egregious misuse of the justice system. Andy McCarthy, everybody.
Clay, we could make we could make him go to a Met game. That would be
Look at you with the self-deprecating Mets humor. I had better material last week before the Braves dropped 3 in a row against the Dodgers. Now I'm wondering what's wrong with the Braves too.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's a long season.
There we go. Andy, it's a long election season and a long season for the Mets. Andy McCarthy, everybody. Andy, thanks so much.
All right, guys.
Thank you. We'll take some calls, 800-282-2882 in just a moment here. This coming weekend is when we get to celebrate and recognize the love and sacrifices that every mother provides for her family. Few organizations witness this decision that mothers make for the life of their children more than Preborn. Preborn's network of clinics exists exclusively to offer love, life, and support to pregnant women who are feeling scared and alone and being pressured to make the ultimate choice for their unborn child. When a distressed mother comes to Preborn, she is welcomed with open arms and is offered a free ultrasound to hear and see the precious life inside of her. So often, she will choose life. This Mother's Day, you can help bring life to both a mother in need and an at-risk baby. One ultrasound is only $28. Every penny you can donate to this nonprofit organization, Preborn, goes toward helping mothers make the right decision for life. And when you become a monthly sponsor, you'll receive pictures and stories of lives you helped to save. Using your cell phone, dial pound 250, say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, say baby, or visit preborn.com/buck. That's preborn.com/BUCK. Sponsored by Preborn.